to recap again, we were just speaking about the idea that Torah is like water for multiple reasons. First, because it quenches our spiritual thirst. Secondly, we also said because it's like water in its direction, that just as water comes from above and lands below, so too does the Torah come from above and came from God. And God, in fact, it says that on Mount Sinai, Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai, that God actually descended upon Mount Sinai to give us the Torah. And then Ronnie beautifully said that it is our duty also, just like water, then to bring the water back above as the water evaporates and creates those clouds, so that that cycle is never ending. So that was the big idea here on page 127. All this, of course, in continuation of the idea that the Torah itself has 248 positive commandments and 365 negative commandments. And these are called the points of activation, so to speak, for our soul, because each time we perform a mitzvah with whichever limb that mitzvah entails, then the limb comes to life and it's activated. And that's why also the 248 positive commandments and the 365 negative commandments really are parallel to the limbs and the organs of the body, because they each come to activate another part of the body. Okay.
Can I make a quick comment?
Please, absolutely. Yes,
It's
please.
Amy. So I missed it last week. When we were in Africa last summer, they refer to water as life.
Oh,
Water is life. Like we take it for granted because it comes out of the faucet.
yeah.
They've got to walk 2 hours to get water for their village.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting because, so speaking of that analogy of water is life and Torah is water, reminds me of the story of Rabbi Akiva, who under great peril and great risks, he continued to teach Torah in the times of the Romans. When he lived in Israel, Rabbi Akiva lived during the times of the destruction of the Second Temple. One of the decrees that the Romans decreed was not just that you're not allowed to circumcise your boys and that you're not allowed to keep Shabbat and so on, but also you're not allowed to learn Torah and teach Torah. And Rabbi Akiva nevertheless continued to learn Torah and to teach Torah. And they asked him, and it's a whole story, but someone who ended up in jail with Rabbi Akiva later on, because Rabbi Akiva was caught teaching Torah, asked him, so why are you risking your life teaching Torah? You know that they can put you to death. And he gave him a parable, and gave him the parable of, have you ever been to a lake? He said, yes. Have you ever seen the fish swimming in the lake? He said, yes. He says, well, let me tell you a story. There was once a fox near that lake, and the fox said to the fish, come out of the water. I'll take care of you, and I'll give you all the goods that you can have in the waters. And the fish said to the fox, we thought you were the cleverest of animals, but you're the stupidest of animals.
Yeah.
Because if we come out of the water, we can't live. You can give us anything we want, but we can't live. Rabbi Akiva said the same year, the Torah is water, and if we come out of the Torah, if we stop teaching or learning Torah, then we die. We die a spiritual death. Just like fish can't exist without water, so too we can exist without the water that is Torah. So there's that parallel too. Thank you, Amy, for sharing that. Beautiful. Okay. All right. So to continue on, let's really continue here at the bottom of page 127. Hence, just as there is no genuine fulfillment of the mitzvot, does anyone want to read?
Somebody else.
Somebody else. That's right.
I'll read if nobody else wants to.
Okay. So.
All right.
Fine.
Right.
And by the way, I'm happy to share the PDF again of opening the Tanya. I'll try to find it and share it throughout the class. If you don't have a book to read from. But okay, so Margot.
How do we make sure we get that?
Okay, so I'll try to attach it now to the chat. But Ronnie,
good.
Why don't you chat me also via Zoom here, your email address, and I'll make sure anyone else who doesn't have that opening the Tanya document, and I'll make sure.
Great, thank you.
Okay, sure.
Okay.
Okay.
Hence, just as there was no genuine fulfillment of the mitzvah without love of God, so there is no true significance to love of God without fulfillment of the mitzvot. A person who yearns to cleave to God and yet is sated with the spiritual experience of yearning for God will never achieve true connection to the divine. When a person merely desires but does not do, even if the desire is genuine and faultless, this alone will never bring about the realization of the desire.
Right. So it's this idea that I think we've spoken about, and that is that deed is what counts. So in the words of the Ethics of Our Fathers, chapter 1, it says, "Ha'maseh wa ikar, la midrash ikar ela ha'maseh," to be more accurate. In the words of Rabbi Shimon, that the midrash, the learning, the words are not the essential. What's essential is the deed. We've spoken about how Judaism really is a faith, a religion. It's not a faith, it's not a religion, but it's a family of deeds. And that's because we really ultimately believe that you are what you do, not what you think, not what you feel, not even what you eat, as health gurus might tell you, but you are what you do. It's the deed that makes you who you are. And that's the ultimate expression of our love. I can tell my wife, I love you all day long. And I can feel it in my heart too. I can really be genuine when I say it. And when she tells me, hey, can you help me clean the dishes? And I say to her, no. So what's my love worth? Not much. I mean, yes, I could again have all the feelings in my heart, and those feelings are the most genuine. I do love her. But if it doesn't translate to deed, what's it worth? And I think that's why there's a sentence out there that I vehemently oppose, and that is that I've heard it countless times. I know people come here and say, Rabbi, I connect to the spiritual side of Judaism, but really I'm not so observant. I'm not whatever it is. And my answer is always the same. So I feel my wife in my heart, but also the diaper changing and the dishwashing and the garbage throwing. I don't connect it to that much also. I love her, but I could. So what's love worth if there's no deed? If you really love someone, you go to the deed level. It doesn't just stay year, but it goes to the deed level. And same year, you can be as spiritual as you want, but if there's no deed attached to it, then there's really no meaning to this spiritual experience. Rabbi Stans would call this by multiple names, some much more coarse than others. I've used this example before, and Jordan has confirmed it for me, but he used the example of a false pregnancy. Some people feel that they're pregnant, but they really are not. It's just a feeling, but there's really no baby that comes out of it. So same here, you can be pregnant with God, but if there's no baby that comes out of it, then what's in it? I mean, was this spiritual experience really worthwhile? He would tell us very often, you can fly into an ecstasy, that's very easy. But does it land somewhere? It's the landing that counts. If you become a better person, have you changed your deeds because of that spiritual ecstasy? By the way, I think it's one of the great themes of this month of Elul. Yes, today is the 17th of Elul, and for 17 days now, we've been listening to the shofar, we've been searching our souls, going inwards and reflecting and meditating to change our ways and to see really what direction we are in life. But the big question is at the end of the day is what deed is going to be born from all of this. If there's no deed, then there's really no change. That's why I think the Jewish calendar is built in a beautiful way, that there's Rosh Hashanah, there's the month of Elul, there's Rosh Hashanah, there's Yom Kippur, and immediately after that high of Yom Kippur, which is the climax, what do? We build the sukkah, and then we shake the lulav. We go to the most materialistic deeds. Physical building of a sukkah. Sukkah is not some spiritual edifice, but it's as physical as it gets. You sweat it out when you build it. And you shake the lulav. You take from the produce of the land itself. You have to feel the soil. Why? God wants you to translate all of this spiritual experience of Elul, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur into deed. Otherwise, again, it's not worth much. Rabbi, I've been, especially the past 30 days, yesterday was a Shloshim of Rabbi Steinsaltz, so I've been almost with obsession, even not sleeping at night because of this, but going through every possible text and video that I can find of Rabbi Steinsaltz. Last night, very late, I was watching a conference he gave in France a few months before his stroke. he had a stroke that debilitated his speech in December of 2016. This conference was in July of 2016, I think July 21st in Paris, France. But he spoke about anti-Semitism, which is, of course, the burning subject of French Jewry. And he had some great analogies, but not connected here to this. But at the very end of his lecture, where he spoke and he was translated for about an hour and 20 minutes, he says to them, to the audience, he says, but what's all of this lecture worth? All these words worth if you don't run and do something. So go run and do something. So, that's to use his words exactly. Go run and do something about it. And he is this great man. Again, the commentary of Robert Stern's is what we're learning right here, saying, fine, we could have felt so good for this hour and 20 minutes and flown to the highest of intellectual levels, spiritual levels. But what's it all worth if you're not going to run and do something? And that's really, that encapsulates the message of Judaism. The mitzvot is the fulfillment of the love. Otherwise, the love is not to God, as genuine as it can be, is not worth much. I'd love to hear your comments. Again, this shouldn't be a monologue, much more.
So I have some words to share.
Please, Ron.
Action and words go hand in hand, and all good love is so free. But remember, action speaks louder than words, and that's how love should be.
Beautiful. 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 Really beautiful. Very nice. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Yeah. You know, to take it just maybe a little step further, but in Hebrew, and that's the word that's used in the ethics of our fathers, ma'aseh wa ikar. The word for action is ma'aseh. And the Kabbalists teach that ma'aseh also has another word in it. It's the beauty of the Hebrew language. And of course, Kabbalah focuses on the dual meaning, sometimes the triple or quadruple meaning of every Hebrew word. But ma'aseh in Hebrew is a word that can also be flipped around. The letters are flipped around. And if you flip around the letters of ma'aseh, you'll get the letter of Shema, which means the Shema prayer, right? Because Maaseh is spelled Mem Ayin Shin or Sin. It's the same letter, Mem Ayin Shin Hey. And the Hebrew letters of Shema is the same, again, same letters, Shin, Mem, Ayin, to hear. And that's because what Maaseh does, what deed does, when we translate indeed the love of God in our heart into deed, then we are aligning our Shema, our inner soul that we listen to, with the deed of God. And that deed of God fulfills the Shema. Again, the soul's voices. So what happens when we say Shema? Shema is our ability to listen to God, right? To listen deep within to God. Now, one may listen deep within to God, but if there's no action that is translated, the Shema doesn't become Maaseh, then it hasn't really reached its potential. That hasn't fulfilled its potential. So what is the Maaseh? The Maaseh is really the fulfillment of the Shema. The deed is the fulfillment of the voices of the soul. The voices can speak to us and we can feel them and feel them. But if you haven't translated into Maaseh, you really haven't fulfilled them. You haven't fulfilled that Shema. Thank you. That's right. And that's very good. That's exactly how the Kabbalists connect those two words. That Naaseh and Nishma, Maaseh and Nishma are the same words, because they are two sides of the same idea. One, if you only work on one side, then the idea cannot be complete. So Dafka, the Naaseh, the deed itself, is what completes the Nishma. Yeah, very good. Okay.
I have two a question and a comment. So as you know, I'm studying right now, doing my PhD, and I had my mind blown yesterday unexpectedly, looking at the mystical thread of, as we're talking about, of religion, and then the orthodoxy, the rules and the actions. And I've always held a value judgment about the establishment, the institutionalization of religion, and pondered why it had to happen, and why can't we all just be mystics in the desert. And the book I read yesterday, or I finished reading, it presented all of the, you know, the politics and the history, everything that had happened. But in the end, there were no value judgments, and it showed the value of, so it showed the light and the shadow side of both sides. That you know, what good are you if you're sitting in a cave meditating? And so it kind of gave the value of the orthodox side, that orthodox in the sense of by the books and
Right.
you know, yeah, and that was very valuable.
Yeah. Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. It's true. It's reminiscent of really the root of prayer. The Talmud asks, why do we pray? And the answer is, there's two answers. One is because our forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, instituted prayer. That's why we have three prayers. Abraham instituted the morning prayer, Isaac the afternoon, and Jacob the evenings. But then it gives another answer, that the prayers today that we pray came instead of the sacrifices. Today we can't bring sacrifices because we don't have yet a temple, even though Be'ezrat Hashem Mashiach will come today and it will be built. But until that happens, then we can't really bring sacrifices. So instead of sacrifices, we offer prayers. Now, if you think about those two answers, and by the way, there's no decision in the Talmud of who's right. Both answers are right. But if you think really of what the Talmud is conveying, is exactly this idea. On the one hand, prayer has to come from the heart, just as the forefathers, when they instituted those three prayers, they did it in the most spontaneous way. For example, the prayer of Mincha, the afternoon prayer that was instituted by Isaac. How was it instituted? Vayetze Yitzchak lasuach basadeh. Isaac went out to the fields to converse with God. That's how the Mincha prayer was instituted. Just imagine the scene. He's going out, he's in a moment of ecstasy. Let's go and converse with God in the fields, in an open place where I can sense the awesomeness of God. So on the one hand, you have that side of prayer, the forefather type of prayer, which is really from the heart. It's a soul ecstasy. On the other hand, it's sacrifices. Sacrifices were very ritualistic, they had set times, set places, set ways of doing things. There was nothing too soulful about sacrifices. There was blood everywhere. But on the other hand, what the Talmud is saying is exactly that. That on one hand, that prayer has to be spontaneous, but it also has to have structure and ritual and deed, because otherwise it can't complete the ecstasy of the soul. But was there anything else you wanted to say, Margot?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like we need both. It's almost like left brain, right brain kind of stuff. We need the structure and we need the mysticism. If we have just one or the other, we're not. So that was my big revelation yesterday. So if you take the fish, or we have to go back to the fish because I'm stuck there, the fish and the fox.
Sure, yeah.
You left me there. Doesn't the fish have everything, all the wisdom deep inside? Why does he need external inputs?
So, you know the story of, it's one of my favorite anecdotes. I've shared it many times. There was a writer and a semi-philosopher of our generation, David Frost, who writes about this, about two young fish who were swimming in the ocean, and they bump into an old fish, and they nod their heads. They don't know him, and the old fish says, "So, young fellows, how's the water today?" Again, they nod their heads. They don't exactly know what to do, what to say, and they continue to swim on. After they left the old fish, one young fish says to the other, "Can you tell me what the hell is water?" So sometimes the fish are not aware of their own blessings, and they think that, I think part of the analogy that Rabbi Akiva gave is that indeed the fish think that there's newness outside, and there's things that they can't get in the water outside, because, you know, they're not aware of the blessings that they're surrounded with. And in a way, Rabbi Akiva was saying everything is in the Torah. We don't need to go out of the Torah. Everything is here. Sometimes we don't appreciate it, but everything is here. We know exactly what water is. I'm an old fish, I can tell you. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
You make me think of the two old guys who meet in the park. And one guy says to the other, how's life? So how's the family? You know, it's good to have someone to talk to.
Yeah, very good. Okay. Good. All right, let's continue on here with the line of the Tanya at the bottom of page 127. So speaking of the commandments, and now specifically the 248 positive commandments, they are, in the words of the Tanya, again, compared to, let's continue to read here. Bottom of 127. Margot, you want to continue?
Sure. Which
Okay.
are the 248 limbs of the king, as it were, as it's explained elsewhere.
Right.
The 248 positive mitzvot correspond not only to the 248 parts of the human body, but also to the metaphorical body of the supernal king. Kabbalistic teaching describes God's sovereignty of the universe, the divine manifestations that reveal God as creator and vitalizer of the world in terms of an organism. This is also the divine image in which man has been formed. So the 248 parts of the human body mirror the spiritual structure of the divine organism. This organism is the spiritual source of the mitzvot that have been commanded to us. Thus, when a person observes the mitzvot in thought, speech, and deed, when he attaches himself and cleaves to them, he thereby cleaves to the 248 limbs of God, so to speak. Human beings express cleaving by embracing and kissing the limbs of the body of the beloved. When a person loves God with great desire and craving and wishes to come close to him and cleave to him, the way to consummate this love is by embracing the limbs of the king, the 248 positive mitzvot that are the physical embodiments of the divine revelations in our world.
Right. Okay, so this is really connected to a very profound Kabbalistic idea where, in a way, there is what's called, it's a Kabbalistic notion called Adam Kadmon, which means the primordial man. Now, the Adam Kadmon, the primordial man, is really a reflection of God's light. And that reflection as the shape of a human body. Not that God forbid, and let's clarify that from the get-go, that God has any image attached to him. In fact, it's one of the prohibitions of the Torah that, it's the second of the 10 commandments, that God has no picture, he has no image, and we can't limit him to anything. God is limitless. But what this is saying, of course, in the most abstract way, in the most Kabbalistic and mystical way, is that in a way, God's light reflects the picture of a human being. Why? Just for us to better be able to at least comprehend how to attach ourselves to God. And just as we have 248 limbs, so God has, so to speak, 248 limbs or 248 points of light, so to speak, so that each time we connect to one mitzvah that corresponds to those 248 limbs, then the mitzvah then attaches itself to God's limb, one of those 248 points of light that God has. Again, very mystical idea, but an idea that shares with us that when we perform a mitzvah, we're not just doing a good deed, as usually the word mitzvah is wrongly translated. Mitzvah does not mean good deed. Mitzvah means attachment. Really, that's what it means. It comes from the word tzavta, which means to attach. Because when you do a mitzvah, you're attaching yourself to God's light, to God's being, so to speak. And every mitzvah is a different expression of God's being. So for example, when I learn Torah, I'm attaching my mind to God's mind. It's an encounter of minds. And that's why, by the way, the learning of Torah in and of itself is considered a mitzvah in Judaism, as opposed to other religions, because you're not just learning in order to know what to do, but you're actually joining your mind, attaching your mind, that part of the body, with God's mind. that in of itself is bringing light to the world, because it creates this attachment with God's light, with that point of light that is the brain. And so it is when you give mitzvah, the hand itself is attached to that point of light of God and draws down that light. So each time we do a mitzvah, we're not just doing a good deed, but really what we're doing is that we're aligning our beings with God's being. And that's why, very often you have that description of the story from the Talmud comes to mind, which I might share, but that description of how the righteous are full of light, that they radiate light everywhere. Why? Because they have been able to align their beings with God's being in such a way that it's God's light really shining through their bodies. They've become like vessels of emission of God's light, where they really emit that ultimate light, because there's nothing blocking them and God. God is shining his being through their being. That's the light that we often see in the righteous. By the way, I have a vivid image. I don't think, children see that light more than adults, no doubt. Children are more receptive to that because they have no ego really that separates them and God and their vision. But I remember as a child, I was 7 years old when I first met the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson of blessed memory. I remember walking into 770. That's an image that will never leave me. And as I was walking, the Rebbe was actually walking to his place. It was Mincha was about to begin. The afternoon prayer was about to begin. Now I can swear that as a 7-year-old, again, I saw this tremendous light around the Rebbe. Now, maybe some others did not, some did. Maybe I was, I don't know, I was going through some intellectual craziness, but that's what I saw. And to me, there's no doubt that again is that radiation of God's light, because he was so aligned with God. And the more a person is righteous, the more he can indeed transform his limbs as God's limbs, as just representative of God's limbs in this world, his organs as representative of God's organs in this world, to the point that they become completely one. That's really what this is saying. Now, in a way, we each have, I'm not, we speak about the righteous, but we each have that potential too. And I think very often you see it on people. You really do. I don't know about, I'd love to hear your experience, but you see it on people. Now, there's the story that came to mind from the Talmud is a story about a man, I think his name was Mar Ukva, who was quite wealthy. And he fell in lust with this woman, and he decided to really, he said, you know what, I want to sleep with her. So what did he do? He heard that she was poor. Listen to this atrocious story. He heard that she was poor, and he said to her, I'm going to lend her money for 30 days, and I know she won't be able to repay me. So when the time will come for her to repay me, I'll tell her, you know what, to sleep with me instead of repaying me. He lent her money. Day number 30th came. It was time for her to repay. He went to her house, knocked on the door, and he was all ready to, And she said, I'm so sorry. I don't have the money to repay you. Mar Ukva controlled his inclinations. And he said to her, you know what? You don't have to repay me. And he left. Instead of fulfilling what he had all planned for a long time, he left. And then all of a sudden in the streets, people noticed that he has this light around him. Ner daluk al rosho, that's the expression. It was like a candle lit above his head. And Rav Huna, I think, was one of the sages, noticed it, and he said, what happened? What did you do? You have this light that's emitting from you. You must have done a special mitzvah. And he told him the story. He said, this is what I plan to do. That's how I controlled my inclination. He says, now I understand why you have such light. Now I understand why you have such light. You were able to overcome that Yetzer Hara, which is a mitzvah in and of itself, one of the greatest mitzvah. In fact, the Tanya itself says, I think in chapter 27, I think, that when a person is able to overcome his evil inclination, it creates light that goes all the way, radiates all the way in the heavens. The angels tremble from this light, using his words. And he quotes from the Zohar. The angels tremble from this light, and it brings in return abundance of blessings upon a person, just for the controlling the inclination. Why? Again, because each time we're able to align our body with God's body, so to speak, then it radiates God's light. Then we become one with God, and that shines. There's something that happens, and that light, even the angels are afraid of. They tremble before that light. So that's really what the mystical image of what this is saying. Now, it's true for the 248 commandments, more particularly than it is true for the 365 commandments. Because the 248 commandments are the positive ones, so they actually draw down. The negative commandments, they also draw down a light, and he'll explain that too, but not in a revealed way as the 248 positive commandments, because again, they are positive. They are the ones that focus on deed, not on not doing, but on deed itself. But still, 365 still have that power. In fact, in a way, they have a greater power, which we'll explain soon.
Rabbi,
Yes.
can you
Yes.
just repeat what you had said about the word savta coming from mitzvah? Is that the same word we use for grandmother?
No, so tzavta with the tzaddik. Good point. Tzaddik, vav, vav, taf, aleph. Or in modernized Hebrew, it's tzevet. And you use that word, by the way, in the army a lot, tzevet, because we have a lot of units. You'll be in that unit, I'll be in that unit, tzevet. Ask David, he'll tell you tzevet. But, so that's spelled different. Savta is samech vet taf aleph.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, of course, good question. Yeah.
I have one other question.
Yes, please.
You know, we talk about the non-corporeality of Hashem, which is one of the principles of faith, of Rambam's 13 principles. But when we pray to God, is there anything wrong with having some type of an image of actually what you're praying to, rather than this nebulous, all-empowering thing?
No, that's a great question. That's a great question. So I would go back to the human being to answer that. The story, I think that I may have shared, or maybe not, of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the author of the Tanya himself, was when he, I think I shared it, but I'll share it again. When he held his grandchild on his laps one day, and he wanted to play a trick on him. So this was the Tzemach Tzedek, Menachem Mendel, who became the third Chabad Rebbe. Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi was the first one. But he raised him because he was orphaned at a young age. So he's raised his grandchild. And one day he put him on his laps and he said to him, so let me ask you, where's Saba? Not Safta, but Saba. Where's grandpa? And Rabbi Shneur, and the Tzemach Tzedek, the young boy, Menachem Mendel, pointed to his head. Yes, Saba. He said, that's not Saba, that's the head of Saba. So then he pointed to his heart. He said, that's not Saba, that's the heart of Saba. So the boy wasn't going to give up. And he was brilliant already from a young age. So he left the laps of his grandfather. He went to another room where his grandfather couldn't see him. And then he called out, Saba, Saba, Grandpa, Zaidi. And Zaidi said, yes, what do you want? And Menachem Mendel said, you see, that's Saba. He's calling out your name, your very essence. That's Saba. Now, in a way, that's the expression that we have also as human beings, right? So there's the deepest I that really has no figure to it. You can't say the heart, you can't say the mind, because it has that's not us. And then there's the I as it translates into the heart, as it translates into feelings, as it translates into the mind. Same with God. God is again, you can't draw God, you can't limit God into any image, because again, that's as abstract as it is. But then there's the expression of God. And that's why even in the prayer, we find expressions of God, either by characteristics. In Amidah, we say, Ayla Gadol, Gibor Vanora, that he's strong and he's awesome. And of course, all these expressions don't define the essence of God, because again, that's beyond expression. But you still have the expressions of God, the manifestations of God. So that's that. And then you also have in a way, limbs of God. We speak about a yada chazaka. You know, God took us out of Egypt with a mighty hand. So there's a bodily symbol for God. Again, of course, it's speaking about something much more than a hand, but that's the expression of God. So when it comes to prayer, we can meditate on God as he is in essence, and then really he has no image. Or we can meditate on the expression, the manifestations of God. And then, yes, then you can put an image to that. Just as God does, we can too. So that's the answer.
Right.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay. All right, friends. In conclusion, you know, I know we have just a few seconds left, but in conclusion of our class today, I want to point out two things. Number one, yesterday, as mentioned, was the Shloshim of Rabbi Steinsaltz, 30 days since his passing. We are taught in Kabbalah that every there are stages to the ascent of the soul. The Shiva, the conclusion of the 7 first days of mourning, represent one ascent of the soul. Shloshim, the 30 days, represent another ascent of the soul. And then the first Yortzeit and every Yortzeit thereafter represents yet other ascents of the soul. Each time the soul ascends, it connects to those who are connected to it, and then in a way ascends with them. And since it was the Shloshim of Rabbi Steinsaltz yesterday, no doubt his soul connects to us. Then I would encourage us to connect to him too. How? By either continuing to learn his teachings, either through this book of the Tanya itself, or through, you know, his books, the Talmud, his other commentaries, and so on, or maybe in a stronger way by taking upon yourself a mitzvah, speaking about the deed, taking upon yourself a mitzvah that really will be in honor of Rabbi Steinsaltz. In a way, I think that will ensure that we connect to him too, and not only that he connects to us.